The research shall be socializing today started with the aim of creating content for a permanent exhibition project of the Gold Museum in Cartagena, and later became part of a larger project funded by the ERC named Riversage, whose director is Marcos Martinon Torres. So, in this presentation, I'll be speaking about a gold work tradition that lasted for almost 1800 years. Second was shared between two groups of different cultural kinships in the Caribbean and remained after the colonial encounter to at least the 17th century. This very old gold work tradition lasted long enough to meet a foreign metal in the same archaeological context, namely iron. Let's begin with this story in the Caribbean plains of Colombia, particularly in the Mopox Depression. Many of you surely recognize the images of the Senu hydraulic system, researched for years mainly by Clemencia Plazas, Ana Maria Falchetti, Fernando Montejo, and Esneide Rojas. This transformation of hundreds of thousands of hectares in the plains of the Colombian Caribbean to conduct the waters in times of flood and maintain moisture in times of drought occurred from the beginning of our era until the 10th century. These communities that inhabited that area and dwelling platforms and were buried in mounds also produced gold work of exceptional quality. This early production was classified as early Senu by Ana Maria Falchetti. The early Senu gold work is linked to the development of that goldsmithing horizon that were great termed the International group because it was shared with the lower Central America and other goldsmithing regions in Colombia of groups belonging to the Egyptian linguistic family. Some zoomorphic staphinias, nose rings, breastplates with high gold content from 70% onwards were produced in the early Senu gold work. And the kind of semicircular earrings that you can see in the slide, which are very famous. This one is the grandmother of generations of semicircular earrings that were produced using lost wax casting for 18th centuries. This is an artificial timeline to show the variety of this kind of objects in time. The Senu people used to live in the lower San Jorge River region from at least the 1st century AD, and later, around the 10th century, the Senu people abandoned this region and went up to the highlands, possibly until the time of the Spanish conquest. The consolidation of gold work production of those populations called Senu before and after the 10th century is evidence in the diversity of local technological expressions belonging to the same tradition. Ana Maria Falchetti established 5 gold work groups that summarize this diversity. In the words of Ana Maria, each group of gold work can be identified as an assemblage that was produced and used by communities occupying a particular geographical setting during a specific period of time. So these are 5 gold work groups that belong to the same tradition that has been called Senu by Ana Maria Falchetti. In the 12th century, other people that we'll call malibú occupied part of this old Senu territory and the areas further north by the lower Magdalena River and the San Jacinto Range. So this is the Magdalena River, and what we call lower Magdalena River is this part, and this one, greenish, is the Serranía de San Jacinto. These people possibly came from what we know today as Venezuela. They brought a new ceramic tradition, used shell ornaments, produced ceramic wind instruments, and adopted the Senu gold work tradition. They made the same kind of objects, but they made some changes. They used more copper-rich alloys with surface enrichment of gold. 2, slightly changed the iconography of semicircular earrings and staphinias. And 3, began to make circular filigree earrings, such as this one. As part of my work as curator, I've been analyzing gold work of this tradition, trying to differentiate and characterize the Senu and malibú variants. Also, trying to understand how their technologies and iconographies overlap in time and space, considering that the remaining descendants of the Senu people were possibly sharing or neighboring territories with groups known as the Malibú at the beginning of the Spanish colonial encounter. As shows the latest variant of this tradition, which is this one, that is richer in copper, the San Jacinto, which is called the San Jacinto and Lower Magdalena gold group to characterize first. Luckily, while I was studying the artifacts at the museum, we came across two archaeological sites with funerary context with materiality from this variant. The sites called La Pasión and San Felipe, where the sites I studied. Some of the main burials at these two sites are contemporaneous between the 16th and 17th century, and both are in the southeast area of the San Jacinto range. This area possibly was an area of conference between the two groups, Zenú and Malibú. And I'm going to say that I'll be using the two anonyms too, but as like ways of referring to the styles, but we know that the archaeological landscape is much more complicated than this. Although some of the funerary structures of San Felipe were damaged because of the looting, we believe burials at both sites have similar characteristics. They consist of a circular step shaft of 1 or 2 meters of depth, culminating in a pit containing the individual, sealed with a ceramic lid. So this is the ceramic lid, and this is the pit, this is the profile, and that's how you see it from above. Both sites have tombs with external burial assemblages on the steps surrounding the urn lid in a semicircular arrangement. Their material expression was different from the inner assemblage, which was deposited with the bodies. The objects of the external assemblage show no signs of wear, suggesting possibly that they were crafted specifically for the funerary event, whilst the internal assemblage consists of objects including worn ornaments and musical instruments, likely used by the individual buried there. The artifacts found in the burials had a wide range of provenances. On this map, we show the movement of raw materials objects and iconographies at 4 scales: local, regional, intercontinental, and transoceanic. My colleagues, Luis Carlos Choperena, archaeologist of San Felipe, and Julian Gamboa, archaeologist of La Pasión, reported the presence of ceramics produced locally, which are these copas, and the presence of ceramic that comes from the Lower Magdalena region, which is this kind of ceramics, and this is the Lower Magdalena River. They reported also shells coming from the Caribbean Sea and lithic artifacts from the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, possibly produced with variscite from Roque Island in Venezuela. These lithics. Gold artifacts typical of the San Jacinto range and Lower Magdalena regions were recovered, many of them with strong iconographic significance or pre-Hispanic utility, such as rattles, sequel earrings, and N-shaped nose rings. The Darien pendant from San Felipe, without a doubt, connects this community to a wide network that reproduced a similar mythical figure for nearly 2 millennia. It spread across Colombia from the early centuries of the Common Era. With the spread of metallurgy northwards in the first millennium, the icon expanded into Panama, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Mexico. After the 10th century, Darien pendants ceased to be produced in most of these regions. The late occurrence in the San Jacinto range signifies a lingering tradition adopted by new populations. Domestic European animal species, such as chickens, were buried instead of the usual tropical birds used before the conquest. So they used to bury people with guacamayas, papagayos, and parrots. They were like the companions in this burial context. And in San Felipe, they also buried one dog, which we don't know yet if it has an European origin or American. Small green and yellow European glass beads were found at La Pasión. These beads resembled those reported during Columbus' first exchanges with native populations in Bahamas, and they were widely reported across the Caribbean with the production concentrated between 1490 and 1550. And iron. As many of you know, iron was not smelted in America before the 15th century. It arrived here with the conquest. So here the new iron meets the old tumbaga, sharing the same sphere of value. Understanding the social context in which metals were worked and traded between the 16th and 17th centuries requires a study of control exercised by the Spanish crown over the metals. The same regime dominated the development of two trades, goldsmithing and blacksmithing. The crown wanted to prevent people from avoiding payment of the royal fifth. The royal fifth was the tax that had to be paid to the crown after the acquisition of precious metals. Collecting the royal fifth and casting for coinage only was allowed to happen in the foundry houses and later in the mints. In New Spain, for example, the prohibition on goldsmith work had implications for blacksmithing, bearing in mind that facilities for processing iron, such as the forge, could also be used for gold casting. And it was forbidden to trade or teach blacksmithing to indigenous or African slave people. These constrictions regulated the systems by means of royal decrees or cédulas reales. In Nueva Granada, it is said that only half of the gold traded or looted by Spaniards was reported to the crown. So if metals were under the strict control of the crown, how did the tumbaga and the iron artifacts end up in this presumably indigenous funerary context of La Pasión and San Felipe? Gold casting was fully restricted and only allowed to be done in the foundry houses. But as we've seen, indigenous people knew how to mine metals, cast and hammer tumbaga for almost 2,000 years in this region. Subsequently, as part of this research, we are looking to characterize the late malibú goldwork technology to identify places where goldwork objects were produced and distributed. Since these objects are extremely corroded, as you can see, not only in surface but in section, leaving very little metal left to analyze, their study requires the exploration into different levels of invasive analysis. The lack of these kinds of analysis on corroded objects might remain underrepresented the San Jacinto or malibú technology in the landscape of regional goldworks. We carried out compositional metallographic analysis in cross-section with the SEM-EDS for both tumbaga and iron, and surface analysis with the PXRF after cleaning gently with a Dremel the object's surface to avoid corrosion. 26 objects, tumbaga objects from La Pasión and 36 from San Felipe were studied. The diversity of textures, colors, corrosions, and layers in general, in alloys with very high copper content, led to a great uncertainty about what was being analyzed with the PXRF. As this was moving us away from the original aim, which was to characterize the bulk of the objects to know which alloys were used, explorations into the stratigraphy of the objects needed to be done. These were all possible cases that we needed to assess before coming up with an accurate value for each object. I have to say that this picture belongs to a Tairona object, but I put it there just so you see the kind of corrosion you get when you get silver sulfide. I did analysis on different kinds of surfaces, which I classified according to their color and texture. In the ternary diagram to the left, I plotted the compositions of all kinds of surfaces, like black, tarnished, red, and gilded areas, and the results obtained after analyzing the same areas several times but with different levels of mechanical cleaning. So that's why it is marked nivel 1, 2, 3, 4 de limpieza. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you see the right ternary diagram, it illustrates the two different compositional ranges resulting from analysis of gilded versus naturally exposed red or black tarnish areas. So this would be like the gilded and the black tarnish or red areas. These two areas correspond to the actual compositions of the bulk and gilded surfaces as the SEM-EDS results in cross-section show. The left ternary diagram plots the PXRF results of a gilded area versus the bulk, and the right one the same but in a SEM-EDS analysis in cross-section. The PXRF analysis aimed to expand the analytical sample with objects from the Museo del Oro that are comparable to those from the two sites. The analysis in cross-section helped to characterize general aspects of the technology and raw materials used. After studying the gold composition, we know that not a large amount of gold was used to enrich the surfaces of these objects. This technological trait is characteristic of malibú goldsmithing, persisting from pre-Hispanic to post-colonial periods. I'll present the analysis of this single object to illustrate the characteristics of this type of gilding. These are circular ear ornaments found in a 14th to 15th century burial with two people. The majority of these objects do not preserve metallic portions. Hence, I analyzed only one of the ear ornaments. I did bulk analysis for this artifact. The white rows are the normalized results of gold, silver, and copper. The first yellow rows shows the composition of the native gold added into the alloy, which has around 15% of silver and 85% of gold. That is a large amount of silver, but as you can see in the histogram, it is the range of silver to gold rates previously reported by Vicente Restrepo and many others. So this is a typical composition of alluvial gold. The silver has higher diffusion rate than gold and lower than copper. That's why there is a higher concentration towards the surface than in the bulk. This annotation is important as it corrects our prior belief that copper-rich zones extremely high in silver were evidence of natural silver content in the copper. Last, the enriched place silver areas were product of the analysis of some black tarnish areas in the objects. In this tumbaga, the copper content represents the 70% of the alloy and the alluvial gold the 25%. Copper then is 3 times higher than alluvial gold. In other artifacts, copper represents even the 90% of the alloy. That suggests that the gilding was possibly achieved with not only 10 to 20% of gold, forming very thin layers, such as the one of this earring that is about 0.7 to 1.2 microns. This technique of depletion gilding on very rich copper tumbagas continued until the conquest, as demonstrated by the analysis of other pieces from La Pasión site. The Malibú goldsmiths were actually being accused in colonial documents of cheating. Jimena Lobo Guerrero, for example, discusses how low-carat doubloons that were plated circulated on this territory in early colonial times. So the quote says, in 1659, another trial was conducted against a villager for stealing gold. During his defense, and in order to get some benefits, he confessed that he knew about some low gold doubloons that were circulating around the village and that they were fake, made only of 10 to 12 carat and with gold plating. This gold plating was, according to the description, of a very yellowish color. But it was not only commoners or indigenous people who traded in this type of items. Unlike other regions in the Eastern Colombian area where the yellowish color of gold was not essential to share the social message, here golden surfaces were part of the cultural preferences. This desire was achieved through other alloys too. In La Pasión, we found that not only hammered native gold objects were buried along with the person, native gold that has around also 20% to 25% of silver, which is high, as we've been seeing in the other presentations. So not only they were using like gilded surfaces and native gold, but also brass. This is how uncorroded brass looks. And brass was an alloy never used by indigenous pre-Hispanic goldsmiths and was introduced here with the colonial content, as well as iron. One of the reasons why it is difficult to find iron or steel objects in context is because iron was rarely discarded since its smelting requires a lot of resources, knowledge, and skills. Iron usually was rather reused or recycled. Therefore, finding iron in these burials suggests that even if we don't know if they were used in life by the same people, we do know that they were valuable enough to be buried rather than recycled or reused in the world of the living. At La Pasión, children, teenagers, and adults were buried with iron objects. Some individuals were buried even with 10 iron artifacts, an unusually high number. We will not discuss the analysis of the iron objects today. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to share that we have made progress on two fronts within the regional landscape. Firstly, we've undertaken a typological study with detailed drawings and measurements along the blades to prove that these are not necessarily weapons but agricultural and domestic tools. Spud hoes, machetes, big knives, horseshoes, and these kind of objects are very interesting. They are mouth hearts that, they were like produced since I think 2,000 years ago in Asia and Africa, and they were adopted very here, but also they are continue being used nowadays in La Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta by the indigenous groups. And secondly, we have conducted an analysis of slag inclusions. This later analysis allows us to establish compositional groups, potentially enabling us to characterize the iron smelting method, the smelting process, and the raw materials used. So, voy a cambiar a español para las conclusiones porque quisiera que algunas cosas quedaran claras. Ay, creo que se perdieron las... Ok, se perdió la diapositiva de las conclusiones. Con esta presentación quisiera dejar 4 puntos claros sobre las reflexiones que hemos hecho. Uno es el estudio de los métodos de elaboración de piezas de la serranía de San Jacinto, que busca caracterizar unos artefactos que por sus estados de corrosión pueden estar subrepresentados en el imaginario regional, concretamente en el Caribe. Normalmente, digamos que la mayoría de gente tiene dentro de su panorama la idea de que esto es una tradición zenú, y si bien es una tradición que inicia con los grupos que estaban en la depresión momposina a comienzos de nuestra era, es una tradición que luego es adoptada por otros grupos con otro parentesco cultural que es adoptado, y a este grupo es que Ana María Falchetti le ha llamado Serranía de San Jacinto. Entonces, dentro del panorama también de la orfebrería, esa región que se puede llamar también malibú, pues debería aparecer a partir del siglo XII en el imaginario de la arqueología. Vale la pena tener en cuenta que la orfebrería de la Serranía de San Jacinto y el Bajo Magdalena en el panorama regional incluso sí está al día, porque ella extiende la influencia internacional de ciertos íconos hasta la colonia temprana. Aquí no sé qué pasó con la imagen, pero hay una serie de íconos que tienen sombrero bifurcado, que se supone que se dejan de producir como hacia el siglo X o algo así, y que luego resultan en esta orfebrería que va hasta tiempo de contacto, y por eso creo que vale la pena tenerse en cuenta. Estos dos sitios, San Felipe y La Pasión, demuestran estar insertos en redes de intercambio de diferentes escalas y relaciones diferentes con los centros coloniales. La documentación cuidadosa de qué aparece en qué lugar del enterramiento y cómo es indicio de las esferas de valor que comparten ciertos materiales y de su lugar en el orden ontológico. Esperamos que pronto puedan consultar esta información en el artículo que está en revisión, cuyo título es Here, There and Everywhere, como la canción de los Beatles, Artifacts for the Deceased of the San Jacinto Range, Colombia in the Early Colonial Period. Y el cuarto punto es que La orfebrería y el hierro se entremezclan en los mismos lugares dentro del contexto de enterramiento. Por un lado, el hierro renuncia a su lógica funcional para acompañar al muerto por siempre, y por otro, la elaboración de orfebrería continúa, al menos en la colonia Temprana, con los mismos estándares de antes de la colonia. Ambos sucesos, a pesar del intento de las instituciones coloniales por fiscalizar los metales. Gracias. Y quería hacerle el homenaje a las culturas.